The snow came early that year to the high pass. Henry had stopped expecting visitors long ago. His cabin stood alone above the tree line. The forge inside had not gone cold in 12 winters. That night, a sound fell from the sky. It was not thunder, it was wings. Henry stepped out into the blue dusk with the lantern swinging at his hip, and the cold bed through his coat at once. Snow had begun to fall in slow drifting threads from a sky the color of old iron. He listened. Somewhere beyond the woodpile, something heavy had struck the frozen earth. He could hear it breathing in long, ragged pulls through the dark. It was not the sound of any animal he knew on this mountain. The dog he had buried last spring would have growled at it. Henry went forward without one. He held the lantern high and let the light go before him into the falling snow. The light caught her first along a stretched white wing, half buried in the drift. The feathers were not feathers at all, but long pale scales that caught the lantern like wet glass. One wing lay folded under her body at an angle no living thing should bear. He stood quite still. Her chest rose and fell in long, uneven pulls. She did not lift her head when he approached to the soft snow. He stopped 6 paces away from her and let the lantern speak for him in the dark. She was the strangest and most beautiful thing he had ever seen. The wind moved gently in the pines around them. She was tall, even crumpled, with skin the color of moonlit ash and hair the same impossible pale as her wings. A long, curved blade lay half a step from her open hand. Its edge was dark with something that was not snow. Henry stood very still for a long moment. His breath ghosted out white in the lantern light. He had seen wounded things before in 50 years of high mountain living. He had never seen anything like this. He set the lantern down gently in the snow where she could see it. Then he sat back on his heels and waited for her to die or to live. He did not touch her that first night. He brought a thick wool blanket from the cabin and laid it gently over her shoulders, careful of the broken wing. He built a small fire of pine and birch a respectful distance away. The warmth could reach her without crowding her. Then he sat down across from her in the snow and waited the way he had waited for many slow things in his life. The fire burned low and steady through the dark. He fed it sparingly from the small pile of wood he had brought. He listened to her breathing and watched the snow fall. He did not sleep to her breathing and watched the snow fall. He did not sleep. Her eyes opened sometime after midnight. They were the color of cold copper, and they fixed on him without blinking for a long time. He did not move under their weight. He spoke softly into the dark, just his own name and nothing more. He used the voice he had once used for nervous horses. She did not answer him. She did not move. After a long while, her copper eyes closed again. He stayed by the small fire and watched her chest rise and fall. The snow stopped sometime before dawn. The sky overhead turned slowly from black to a soft pale gray. By the first light, she was still alive, and that was enough for Henry. He went into the cabin and brought water back in a shallow tin bowl and set it within reach of her good hand. She watched him cross the clearing and watched him return. Her copper gaze never softened, but she did not strike at him either. He took that as the first small bargain between them in the cold morning. He did not press for more from her than that. He sat down again on a low stump nearby and let the new day come up over the dark line of the pines. The wing was the worst of it by far. He had mended the legs of horses and the wings of falcons. He had once set the shattered ribs of an old hound. This was a thing he did not know. The bones beneath the pale scales were long and hollow and very fine. He went into the cabin and brought out his clean splints and his linen. He brought the small clay jar of honey he kept for burns. He worked in silence the whole way. The morning sun came pale through the thin clouds above the pass. He laid his tools out carefully on a clean folded cloth. He knelt beside her in the cold morning light and showed her each thing in turn before he used it. The splint, the clean linen, the honey amber bright in its small jar. He kept his movements slow and visible the way his father had taught him long ago. When at last he touched the broken wing, she flinched once, hard. Her breath hissed out between teeth that were sharper than any human teeth. But she did not move away from him. She held her ground there in the snow and let him work. He did not waste her courage. The setting took him most of the morning. He felt the long bones slide back into their proper places under his careful fingers. He heard a sound come out of her that was not a word in any language he knew. He understood it though. It was pain held tightly inside a closed throat. It was pain that would not be allowed out into the cold air between them. When it was done, he bound the wing close to her body with the clean linen, gentle and firm. He sat back on his heels in the snow and let out a long breath. She had not made another sound. The morning had become afternoon. She slept then for 2 full days. Henry did not leave the cabin much in that time. He brought her water and broth and tended the small fire he had moved closer to her each hour. By the second evening, she lay just outside his door on a thick bed of pine boughs and folded blankets. He sat in the doorway with his pipe unlit in his hand. He watched the snow fall again over the clearing. He listened to her slow, even breathing in the dusk. He did not feel the long ache of his solitude as he usually did at this hour. There was another breath in the world that was his to keep. On the third morning, she was sitting up. She had pulled the blankets carefully around herself with her good hand. She watched him through the open door of the cabin with those copper eyes steady. He set a bowl of warm broth on the threshold and stepped back to give her room. She reached for it with a hand that trembled only a little. She drank slowly, watching him the whole time over the rim of the bowl. She did not look away while she drank. He stood quite still in the doorway and let himself be watched. The broth steamed in the cold air between them. He pointed at himself with his rough hand. "Henry," he said softly. He pointed at her then. He did not say anything else after that. She held the empty bowl in both hands for a long moment and considered him with narrowed copper eyes. The morning sun came pale through the open door behind him. Then her mouth moved around a sound that was half song and half breath. It came out shaped like one careful word: veil. He nodded to her as if he had been told something of great importance. The cold morning held its breath around them. Then a small wind moved through the pines. That night he brought her inside the cabin. He could not bear to leave her in the snow. Another evening with her wings still raw beneath the linen. The wind had begun to turn sharper from the north. He cleared a space near the hearth where she could rest with the wings supported by a folded quilt. She came through his low door bent down so the lintel would not catch her good wing. The cabin felt different at once with her inside it. The firelight reached the far walls in a new way. The old roof beams seemed to lower themselves around her presence. He closed the heavy door against the cold. She filled the small cabin in a way no person ever had before. He had built it for one man and one chair and one narrow bed and the forge that took half the room. She sat by the fire and watched the flames carefully. She watched him moving about his quiet evening tasks. The firelight ran along her pale scales and turned the rough wooden walls into something they had never been before. He kept his work quiet and steady. He fed the fire. He hung the kettle. He moved about the small room as if there had always been another person watching him from the hearth. He gave her his bed that night and slept on the bench by the cold forge. He folded an old coat under his head for a pillow. He did not sleep well, but it was not from the discomfort of the hard wooden bench beneath him. It was from listening in the dark. He listened to the slow, steady breathing of a thing that should not have existed by any reckoning he knew. He found, lying there in the dark, that he did not mind it at all. He had not slept easily in many years anyway. The strange new breath in his cabin was a kind of company. He closed his eyes. In the morning, he made porridge in the iron pot over the hearth. He tried to remember everything he knew about feeding wounded creatures who did not eat what men ate. He set down a small portion for her with a piece of dried apple and a strip of smoked venison. He sat at the table with his own bowl and waited for her to choose. She lifted each thing carefully and considered it before she ate. She smelled the apple first, then the venison, then the porridge. She finished all of it in slow, careful bites. He felt a small, quiet relief in his chest. The days that followed settled into a rhythm he had not expected after 12 winters of his own quiet routine. She slept much of the morning, healing. By afternoon, she would rise slowly and move about the small cabin. She learned its small geography one careful step at a time. She touched the tools on the wall. She touched the cold iron of the anvil with one finger. She touched the worn leather handle of the bellows that he had not let go cold in use. Henry worked at the forge and let her watch him. He did not speak unless he had to. On the 5th day, she pointed at the bellows and made the small sound that he had come to understand meant a question between them. He showed her how it worked. He pumped the leather handle and watched the coals brighten under the rush of air. She leaned her head close to see. Her copper eyes were wide as a child's eyes. Then she reached out her own good hand and tried it for herself. The laugh that came out of him then surprised them both in the warm, small room. She looked up at him sharply, and then her mouth moved in something that was almost a smile. She learned his words quickly, the way a clever child learns them. Fire, bread, water, door, snow, hand, tea, wing. He learned a few of her own in return, though her language was made of sounds his old throat could not fully shape. They settled for a mixed tongue between them. It was half pointing and half quiet syllables, and somehow it was enough. By the end of the first week, he could ask her if her wing pained her in the morning. She could answer him with a careful word and a small gesture. He took every small exchange as a quiet gift between them. He changed the linen on her wing each morning and each evening without fail. The break was knitting slowly, the long hollow bones finding their old shape again under his careful, patient hands. He kept the honey thin on the wound where the scale had been torn open. She would close her copper eyes while he worked over her in the firelight. She would trust him with a stillness that he tried not to think about too deeply. Thinking about it made his old chest ache in ways he had thought long since dulled. He kept his hands gentle and steady. He kept his face quiet. She had a story behind those copper eyes. He could see it clearly in the way her gaze would sometimes drift to the small, high window and stay there. She would look up at the sky as if listening for something far away beyond the iron clouds. She would not speak in those moments. He could see it also in the curved blade on the mantel. He had quietly cleaned it of the dark stain and set it back where she could reach it if she chose. She would sometimes lift it in her good hand and turn it slowly. She remembered its weight, the way a soldier remembers a weight. He did not ask her about any of it. He had buried a wife 12 winters back. He had learned of that long grief that some stories live too close to the bone to be drawn out by questions. If she wished one day to tell him who she truly was, she would tell him in her own time. Until then, he would feed her and tend her wing and let the fire warm her through the long evenings. That was the whole of his work in this season. He had work and he had company, and he had a hearth that did not burn for one alone anymore. It was more than he had asked for from any winter. On the 9th day, he was splitting wood at the block beyond the cabin. He heard her step behind him in the snow for the very first time. She had come out into the cold air on her own bare, pale feet, the broken wing still bound, but the good one open a little for balance. She watched him swing the heavy axe through the cold air. She watched the way the rounds of birch split clean along the grain. She did not speak the whole time. She only stood quietly in the soft snow with her good wing half open behind her and watched him work. He felt her there. He set the axe down carefully against the block and brought her a fresh length of split birch. He laid it gently in her good, open hand. She looked at the pale wood for a long moment and then up at him. The cold morning sun caught in her copper eyes. She did not speak. She lifted the piece of split birch close to her face and breathed in the smell of it. Something in her copper eyes loosened a little, the way ice loosens at the very edge of a slow thaw. She set the piece carefully on top of the woodpile herself. She nodded once to him. He nodded back. That evening, she ate at the table with him for the first time. She sat across from him in the chair that had been Mara's once, 12 winters ago. She ate the stew he had made of root vegetables and venison. She watched the firelight move on the rough wood of the table between them. When she had finished, she set down the wooden spoon and looked at him steadily. "Henry," she said softly. It was much clearer than before. He nodded slowly. He poured her more tea from the iron kettle. The cabin held its warmth around them in the deepening dusk. Outside, the snow had begun to fall again. He poured her a small cup of the apple spirit he kept for the coldest nights. She sniffed it once carefully and set it aside with a small wrinkle of her nose that he understood without needing words. He laughed quietly into his own cup at the look on her face. She watched him laugh. Her own mouth moved in a shape that was almost a smile of her own. The small cabin felt warmer than the fire, and the spirit alone could have made it. He found himself thinking that he had not laughed inside these walls in a very long time. The thought did not sadden him. He told her about his wife that night without quite meaning to. He did not know if she fully understood the words he used, but she sat very still and listened with her copper eyes the whole time he spoke. He told her about Marah and the long, hard winter that had taken her. He told her about the empty chair he had not ever been able to bring himself to throw out or burn. When he was done speaking, Vale reached across the small table and laid her cool, pale hand briefly over his rough one. She did not speak. She did not need to. He nodded once and looked away. In the second week, the snow came again, heavier this time, and they were closed in together by the deep drifts. The snow rose halfway up his small windows by the third morning of the storm. He taught her to grind the flour in the small hand mill that hung from a beam by the door. She taught him in return to fold the soft inner edge of her wing flat against her side when she came through the low doorways of the cabin. They cooked together in the small kitchen corner. They tended the fire. They moved around each other in the small space as if they had always done so. She began to test her wing carefully on the 10th day. He would catch her in the cold morning sun outside the cabin. She would have the linen unwrapped for a few careful minutes. She would lift the long, pale span slowly into the still air and fold it back down again. The movement was stiff and uncertain at first. Her face would tighten with the work of it. He did not interrupt her or try to help. He only watched from the doorway with a cup of tea in his hand. He counted each motion of the mending wing as a small private victory of her own. She knew he watched. He had begun during those long, quiet evenings to work at his forge on a project he had not undertaken in many years. He drew out a thin band of bright steel from his small stock. He shaped it slowly and carefully into a long curve. He tempered it slow over many hours of careful heat. She watched him from her place by the hearth, the firelight and her copper eyes. She did not ask him what he was making. He did not tell her. The work was patient and slow and demanding. He found that he wanted it to be exactly right. He had not wanted any piece of his work to be exactly right in years. When at last it was finished, he showed her what he had made. It was a brace, a slender steel rib shaped exactly to the curve of her wing's broken bone. It was light enough to be borne easily without strain. It was strong enough to hold against the pull of full flight. He had quilted soft leather along its inside so it would not score her pale scales as she moved. He held it out to her in both his open palms like an offering laid down. She looked at it for a moment in his hands. Her copper eyes filled. She did not reach for it at once. She only looked. She let him fit it that afternoon by the firelight. He bounded gently to the long bone with fresh, clean linen. He watched her open the wing slowly and feel the steel take the weight she could not yet carry alone. She turned her face toward the small, high window. The pale winter sun came through the glass in a long, slow shaft. A sound came out of her throat that was not quite a song and not quite weeping. It was something between the two of them. She held the wing open in the light for a moment. He sat back on the bench. He did not speak. If you are sitting by a fire tonight or driving the long road home in the dark, and you have been here with Henry and Vale in this small cabin above the tree line, I want to ask you something quiet. Drop one single word in the comments below for me tonight. Just one. One word for what you would have brought her on that first cold morning. Bread, water, silence, blanket, fire. I read every one of the words you leave here in the evenings when the work of the day is done. The comments you leave on these slow stories keep the small hearth warm in ways I cannot quite explain. They are the small light by which I write the next one of these stories for you, and I do not take any of them lightly. Now let us step back together to the cabin above the pass, because Vale's broken wing was not the only thing the world had broken in her. The snow was not the only thing falling from that iron sky. In the third week, she could lift the mended wing fully open into the cold air. She walked out into the deeper drifts beyond the woodpile one bright morning and spread both wings against the white world. Henry stood in his doorway with the kettle still in his hand and forgot for a moment to breathe. She did not fly that morning. She only stood there in the snow, tall and pale, the steel brace gleaming softly along the long bone of the wing. She looked like something out of an old story he half remembered hearing as a boy. The morning sun came pale and clear over the ridge. The clearing was very quiet around her. She turned and saw him watching her from the cabin doorway. She folded the wings back carefully against her body and walked to him through the deep snow. At the threshold, she paused and laid her good hand against his shoulder for a long moment. Then she went inside to the fire. He stood in the cold a little longer with the iron kettle still in his hand. He looked up once at the iron sky above the pass. Something in him already knew the world was about to change around him. He did not yet know how. He went inside after her and closed the heavy door against the cold. That night, she finally told him who she was. She sat across the small table from him with both her cool hands wrapped around a hot cup of tea. She looked down into the rising steam for a long while before she spoke. Then she began, slowly, in their mixed tongue. The words came carefully out of her, with long pauses, while she searched for his words, for the things she meant to say. He did not interrupt her once. He sat very still at his side of the table and listened the way a man listens to weather coming down from a far ridge. The fire burnt low. She had been a soldier, she said, but not a soldier the way he understood the word at all. She had been something older than that, something carried in the blood of her line for many long generations before her birth. She had led others into hard places under cold skies. She had stood at the front of long columns, under banners he had no words for in his own tongue. She had been hunted in the end, she said quietly, by a betrayal that had come from inside her own command. She had flown across many borders. She had flown across many borders. She had flown until her wing gave way above his small pass. She told him she would have died in the deep drift below his cabin that first night. She told him she had known it clearly when she struck the frozen ground. She told him she had been quietly content with that knowing. To die in clean snow under an iron sky was the better ending. It was a far better ending than the one her hunters had planned for her if they had caught her alive. She did not look up at him while she spoke any of this part. She turned the cup of cooling tea slowly between her hands. The tea had gone almost cold. The fire crackled once softly between them. He reached across the table then and laid his rough hand over both of her cool ones. He did it the same way she had once laid her cool one over his on the night he had spoken about Mara. He did not say anything a long time. He only sat there and held her hands. Then he said, only quietly, that she was not going to die in a snow. He said that whoever was hunting her would have to come through his door first. He said that he had been mending broken things for 40 long years, and he was not finished mending her yet. The fire popped softly in the grate. She looked up at him then. Her copper eyes were wet and shining in the firelight. She said his name once, very softly, Henry. Then she said something else in her own tongue that he did not understand the words of, but he understood the shape of it perfectly. It was a vow of some kind. It was a vow made carefully meant. He nodded once to her, slowly. He did not say anything to match it. He poured her more hot tea from the kettle. The fire in the small hearth burned low and steady between them through the rest of that long, quiet evening. Neither of them spoke again until morning. He kept the curved blade ready for her after that night. He took it down from the mantel and oiled the long edge with the careful hands of an old smith. He set it within easy reach of her good hand by the hearth. He did not say what he was doing. She watched him do it. He kept his own old rifle, the one he had not lifted since the long war of his youth, leaning quietly by the door. The bolt was freshly worked. The chamber was clean. He did not speak to her about either of these things. He simply made them ready in the cabin around her. She understood without needing words. The hunters came on the 19th day. He saw them first as small black specks against the pale morning sky high above the long line of the pass. 6 of them, moving in a tight, close formation down the line of the ridge. They were too far yet to see clearly through the cold air. But he knew the shape of trouble when it appeared above his own country. He had not seen it in 40 years, but he knew it at once. He went inside the cabin and laid the rifle quietly across the table. He did not raise his voice to her. He only nodded at her once and turned back to the door. She came to the small frosted window and looked. He watched her pale face carefully in the morning light. Her face did not change in the way that a frightened face changes. It changed in the way a tired face changes when a long-delayed thing has at last arrived at the door. He knew that look well. She reached without thinking for the curved blade on the hearth. He stopped her cool hand gently with his and shook his head slowly. He pointed at her wing, still bound in its bright steel brace. Then he pointed at himself with his other hand. He held her copper gaze until she nodded. She understood him. She did not like it at all. but she sat down by the hearth where the angle of the inner wall would hide her from the open doorway. She let him take up his old rifle alone and step out into the cold, bright morning by himself. He did not look back at her once. He left the heavy door open just a finger's width behind him so she could hear whatever passed between them. He walked out across the snow. He stood near the long, pale stretch of cleared ground where they would land. He lowered the rifle across his body and waited. His breath ghosted in the bright air. They landed in his clearing one after another in a slow descending circle. Tall figures, taller than Vale by a full head, armored in dark-scaled plate that seemed to drink the bright light from the snow. Their own wings were the color of wet stone after long rain on the ridge. They folded these wings back against their armored shoulders as they touched down on the snow. They spread out in a loose half-circle around him with their weapons drawn. The weapons hummed faintly. Henry stood his ground in the center of the half-circle. He did not raise the rifle yet. The leader stepped forward out of the half-circle of soldiers. He was a hand taller than Henry. His face was a hard map of old scars from many places. He spoke first in a language Henry did not know, sharp and fast in the cold air. Henry only looked at him without answering for a moment. When the human did not answer, the scarred alien tried again, in rough but understandable speech. He said there was a fugitive in this place. He said the human would step aside now and let the matter be settled cleanly between them. He said it with the flat certainty of a man who had done this before. Henry did not step aside from his ground. He said in his own quiet, level voice that there was no fugitive in this place at all. He said there was only himself and a guest who was healing under his roof through the cold. He said the guest was not to be moved from his hearth today. He said it the way he would have said any plain, true thing of his life. He did not raise his voice. He did not lift the rifle from across his body. He used only the long calm of an old, settled man stating a fact he had decided on weeks before this morning. The clearing was very quiet. The scarred leader laughed once at his words. It was not, Henry noticed carefully, a cruel laugh in the cold air between them. It was the laugh of a soldier confronted with something he had not expected to find at the edge of nowhere. He looked at Henry for a long, thoughtful moment. He looked then at the small log cabin behind him, and at the thin, steady smoke rising from the chimney into the cold sky. He shook his scarred head slowly. He said that the human did not understand at all what he was protecting in this small place. He said the human was a small man at the edge of nothing. He said what was inside that small house was a matter for far older powers than himself. He said that the human should stand aside now, while the standing aside was still permitted to him by the soldiers in the half-circle. There was no anger in his voice when he said any of it. There was only patience. Henry said he understood enough for his own purposes. He said he had mended her broken wing through 3 long, quiet weeks of his own work. He said he had given her his own table and his own bed and his own fire through that whole time. He said it without raising his voice once. He held the leader's gaze. He said that whatever she had been before she fell out of the cold sky into his snow, she was his guest under his roof now. He said this last word, guest, with a weight the scarred alien seemed to feel through his dark armor. The clearing went very quiet around them at the sound of it. The wind moved. The wind moved softly through the dark pines at the tree line. Somewhere far above against the iron sky, a single high bird called once and was gone. The 5 soldiers behind their leader did not move at all. The leader looked at Henry with an expression that was no longer quite the same. He looked at him now, as a man looks at something he has not seen before in his long life. The leader's gloved hand had lowered slightly. The hum of his weapon had grown quieter in the cold air. Henry did not move from his ground. He kept the rifle low across his body. He kept his breathing even. The scarred alien took one careful step forward through the deep snow. Henry raised the old rifle slowly. He raised it the way a man raises a thing he has not raised in 40 long years and has been hoping all that time never to raise again in this world. He did not point it at the leader's chest. He pointed it at the bright snow between them, drawing a clear line in the air with a long barrel. He said in the same quiet voice he had used for everything else that morning, that this was as far as they would come into his clearing today. He said it without challenge. He said it as a fact. The scarred leader looked at the old rifle in Henry's steady old hands. He looked at Henry's face above it for a moment. Something complicated moved behind the alien's scarred eyes in that moment. He did not step forward again. He did not lower his own weapon either. The clearing held its breath around them. Behind Henry, the door of the cabin opened slowly on its old leather hinges. Vale stepped out into the morning sun. She did not carry the curved blade in her hand. She held only the steel brace, freshly unbound from her wing in her cabin. She let the long, pale wing open fully behind her into the cold air. The bright morning light caught along its mended edge. It caught also along the bright steel rib that ran beneath the wing. She walked past Henry through the snow without a word. She placed herself directly between him and the scarred leader of the soldiers. She did not look back at Henry. She looked at the leader. The scarred alien saw her standing there and went absolutely still. The whole half-circle of soldiers behind him went still also, all at once, as if they were a single creature breathing together. The faint hum of their weapons died completely. For one long-held moment, there was no sound at all. There was only the slow, soft wind in the dark pines at the tree line. There was only the steady, soft breathing of 7 beings who had all forgotten just for an instant why they had come to this small clearing in the high snow. Then the scarred leader sank slowly down onto one armored knee in the snow. The 5 soldiers behind him followed his lead, one after another, until all 6 of them knelt together in a half-circle around Vale. Their heads were bowed low. Their humming weapons were laid flat on the white ground between them and her. They did not move once they had knelt. They held their bowed positions. Henry stood at her shoulder with the old rifle still in his hands. He did not understand any of what he was seeing in his own clearing. He looked at Vale's pale face beside him. Her copper eyes were on the scarred leader's bowed head in the snow. There were silent tears on her pale cheeks. She did not wipe them away. She let them fall slowly onto the bright snow of the clearing. The clearing held its breath around the 7 of them. Somewhere in the dark pines, a small wind shifted direction and went still again. The thin smoke from the chimney of the cabin rose straight and untroubled into the iron sky above. The scarred leader spoke then, and his rough voice had changed completely from before. It was not the hard, flat voice he had used to Henry only minutes earlier in the clearing. It was a voice with a real tremor running quietly through it now. He used a word that Henry did not know in any language. But he used it the way a man uses the title of someone he has both feared and loved across a long, hard life. Vale answered him quietly in their own tongue. She did not raise her voice to him at all. She did not need to raise her voice. She spoke only a few short, careful sentences in reply. The scarred alien bowed his great scarred head lower into the snow at her words. One of the soldiers kneeling behind him made a small sound. It might have been a word in their tongue. It might have been only a quiet breath of relief, held in for far too long. Vale turned then. She walked back across the snow. She walked back slowly toward Henry. She took the old rifle gently out of his rough hands and set it leaning carefully against the rough log wall of the cabin behind him. Then she took his rough hand in both of hers. She stood there with him in the morning sun, before the kneeling soldiers. She spoke to him slowly in their mixed tongue, choosing each careful word in turn. She told him then who she truly was. She told him slowly so that he would understand the shape of her whole life. The morning sun moved gently across the snow. The kneeling soldiers did not raise their bowed heads. They waited. She was not just a soldier, she told him. She had been one once long ago in the early days of her youth. But she had risen far beyond that life over many long years of her people's quiet war. She was now the carrier of an old line, the one her people had been looking for through 3 long generations. She was the daughter of a house older than any of their living memory could recall. She was the one her enemies had wanted dead these last years, above all other ends. She was the one her people had wanted home through every cold season of that long hunting. She was now in the snow of his own clearing. The hunting of her, she said, had broken many families. The long hunting had ended now, here in his small clearing above the snow line of the pass. Because here she had been seen at last by a man who had not asked who she was. Here her wing had been mended without payment. Here in the small place she had become something other than prey to be run down. Henry listened to all of it without speaking. He looked at the 6 kneeling figures in his clearing. He looked at the curved blade resting peacefully on the mantel through the door of his cabin. He looked at her pale face beside him. He looked at the woman whose long wing he had set with his own careful, calloused hands through 3 weeks. He nodded slowly to himself there in the snow. He did not say very much in answer to all of it. He only said, in his quiet, steady way, that he had thought she might be something like that. He said it as if it changed nothing of any importance between them at all. She laughed then. It was the first true open laugh he had heard from her in 19 long days. It broke open something in her pale face that he had not seen in her before. She pressed his rough old hand against her cheek. She held it there against her cheek for a moment. He felt the cool of her pale skin and the wet of her tears together against his fingers. The morning sun moved on across the bright snow. Then she turned slowly back to the kneeling leader and spoke to him again, longer this time, in her own tongue. The scarred soldier rose slowly to his great armored feet at her words. He bowed to her once and stepped back to the edge of the clearing. The 5 other soldiers rose with him as one. They did not speak. They did not pick up their humming weapons from the snow. They left them lying there in the morning sun. They moved together to the dark tree line at the edge of the clearing. They waited there in a quiet, careful row, watching. Henry stood beside Vale and looked at the weapons left lying in the white snow. They gleamed faintly in the morning sun. They looked very small from where he stood. He let out a long breath. Over the next hour, more of them came from the sky to the clearing. They came in small formations of 3, of 5, of a dozen at a time. They came until the small clearing was full of dark armored figures standing in respectful silence all around his cabin. None of them spoke loudly to one another. None of them approached the open door of the cabin or stepped closer to Vale than the others. They formed a long, quiet ring at the tree line, wings folded close against their armored backs, heads slightly bowed. He counted 40 of them carefully, and then he stopped counting when more kept arriving from the south. He stood in his doorway with his unlit pipe in his hand and watched them all silently. Vale moved slowly among the new arrivals, speaking quietly to this one and to that one in turn. She laid her cool hand on the shoulder of a tall, pale woman who wept openly when she touched her. He saw the long ache in that weeping. He could see in their pale faces what Vale had been to them and what she had been gone from them through these long years. The long ache of her absence was in every single bowed head in the clearing. They were not soldiers in that long hour. They were something older than soldiers. They were family told she was dead. He understood the look on their faces well. He had worn it himself once long ago, the wrong way around, on the morning Mara had not woken up. He stood quietly in his doorway and let them have their slow reunion in his clearing. He did not feel out of place there. He felt only that he should not interrupt. She came back to him at the threshold of the cabin after a while. She took the unlit pipe gently out of his rough hand and turned it over once and gave it back to him. Then she told him quietly that her people had a custom held between them for a very long time. She told it to him carefully. She told him that any house which had sheltered the carrier of her line during the time of her hunting was held, by an ancient law, older than her grandfather's grandfather, to be a hearth of her people. She told him that any soul under such a roof was kin to her own house from that day forward in their old law. She told him that this was not a thing she had chosen for him on her own. It was a thing that her line and her law had chosen long before she was born into this world. She told him that if he wished to refuse the honor of it, they would respect that refusal, and they would go quietly away from his pass. He looked out at the long ring of bowed heads at his tree line. He looked at the tall, pale woman in his doorway, whose wing he had mended through the 3 slow weeks. He thought for a moment about the empty chair at his table, that had not been empty chair at his table, that had not been empty for 19 days now. He thought about Mara. He thought about the long silence of his own house before the night the wings had fallen from the sky. He thought about the many years of his own solitude up on this cold pass. He said, quietly, that he was only a blacksmith on a mountain. He said he had a small cabin and an old forge and a woodpile and a kettle. He said he was not the kind of man who kept a hearth of any people in any old law. He said it looking down at his own rough, scarred hands. Then he looked up at her. He said that if she meant to come and go through his door from now on, the fire would always be kept lit for her. She bent her tall, pale head down to his. She did not kiss him there in the doorway. She pressed her cool, pale forehead lightly against his lined forehead and held it there for a long, quiet moment in the morning. The 6 soldiers in the clearing turned their armored faces respectfully away from the door. They turned to give them the small privacy of that moment between them. When she drew back at last, her copper eyes were calm and clear. She said his name once aloud in the morning. She said it the way one says the name of a home long missed. The wind moved softly through the pines. The morning held. The scarred leader came forward then, more slowly and carefully than before. He bowed to Henry now in a way that involved his whole great armored body. He straightened up and spoke again in his rough but understandable speech. He said that his own name was Cor. He had been the captain of her guard for 30 long years. He had held that command, he said, until the day her hunting began and they were scattered. He said it without raising his voice. He said it as a man states a small plain fact of his own life. Then he told Henry that he had spent every day of her absence searching the pale skies for her. He said that the human had done in 3 quiet weeks what the captain of her guard had failed to do in 3 full years. He said it without bitterness in his voice. He said it as a man states the simple truth of a debt that has been honestly owed. He bowed his great scarred head to Henry once more. Then he told Henry that he and his soldiers would carry no weapons into the cabin. He told him they would not enter unless invited across the threshold. He told him they would camp at the tree line and keep the long quiet watch from there. He waited then for whatever the human would choose to say in reply. Henry thought about it for a moment in the morning. Then he told Cor that the captain could come inside the cabin and warm himself by the fire. He said the morning was cold and the captain had been long in the air. He said there was hot tea on the hearth waiting for him. He said it simply. He told Cor that he would not have his guest's old guard freezing in his clearing on the same day she had finally come home. Cor looked at him a long time. His scarred face held an expression Henry could not quite name in any language. Then Cor nodded once slowly to him and came inside. He bent his great armored frame low to clear the lintel of the door. He sat down carefully on the bench by the cold forge so as not to crowd the small, warm room. Henry brought him a cup of hot tea from the kettle. The cup looked very small, held in Cor's great scaled hand. He drank it slowly. He drank it gratefully, as a man drinks something he has not had in a very long time. The fire in the hearth burned bright between them. Vale sat at the small table. The 3 of them said almost nothing. A long while, the cabin was warm. The wind outside moved softly to the pines at the tree line. That night, the small cabin was full in a way it had never been in all its long years of standing on the pass. Vale sat at the table in the chair where Mara had once sat across from Henry through their younger years. Cor sat by the hearth with the teacup in his great scaled hand. His head almost touched the beam. The fire burned bright and steady in the grate. The stew was thick and dark in the iron pot. Henry moved quietly between them with the kettle, refilling cups whenever they emptied. He found the work of hosting easy after all the years of solitude. The cabin had grown easily around the 2 new presences inside it. He smiled. Outside in the snow at the tree line, 40 of her people stood the long watch in careful shifts through the dark. The thin smoke from their small fires rose straight up into the iron sky above the pass. Inside the cabin, Henry's old iron kettle whistled softly on the hearth. Vale laughed quietly at something Cor had said. Henry, washing a wooden bowl at his small basin in the corner, looked up once at the 2 of them by his fire. He let himself smile at the sight. He had not had 2 friends together in his cabin in many years. He had not, perhaps, ever had 2 friends quite like these. The thought did not trouble him at all. The next morning, the rest of them came from the sky. Not the soldiers this time, the others. The old ones with silver hair like winter grass, the young ones with eyes still wide at the size of the world above them, the ones who had carried her line in their long memory through the years. They came down in a long, slow procession over Henry's pass through the morning. They did not land in the small clearing this time. There was no longer room there for them. They landed instead along the high ridge above his cabin in a long, quiet line that stretched as far as Henry could see. By midday, there were 300 of them gathered above his cabin. They had brought banners that snapped softly in the cold mountain wind. They had brought small offerings wrapped carefully in pale cloth. They had brought 1 long pale stone, carried among them with great care, that took 6 of them to lift. The stone was carved deeply with the old marks of her house. They laid it down carefully at the edge of his woodpile, half buried in the snow at the foot of the pile. They did not speak loudly to one another in the cold air. They did not enter his small clearing. They waited at the ridge for her to come out. She did go out to them in time. She walked out into the cold, bright midday light with her long, pale hair loose about her shoulders. Her mended wing was held open behind her. She stood quietly on the low rise just above his cabin. She spoke to her gathered people in their own tongue a long while. Henry stood quietly in his doorway with his pipe in his hand and watched. 300 bowed heads along his ridge listened to her speak. He felt very small standing there and still. He did not understand the words, but he understood the careful, slow way she said them. The wind moved through them. When she had finished her speaking, she walked back down to him at the open door. She told him quietly what she had said to them. She had asked her people to honor the human who had sheltered her through the weeks. They had asked her in return what gifts she wished them to bring to him for his sheltering. She had told them, she said, that he was a man who had asked her for nothing at all in 3 long weeks. She had told them she did not know what to bring him as a gift, because he had named no one of his own in all that time of his keeping her. She looked at him in his doorway and waited. He thought about her a long while in the cold midday sun. Then he said quietly that he had everything he truly needed in this small cabin. He said his forge was good and the roof was sound. He said his woodpile would last him well through winter. He named these things simply, without weighing them. He said the only thing he had ever truly lacked in all his many years of living was company at his own table on the long evenings. He said that this, looking up at her with his quiet old eyes, was already given to him here. He said no other gift would be necessary for any of it. She listened. She looked at him with her copper eyes full again with tears. She turned slowly and translated his quiet words to her people on the high ridge above. A great silence moved through the long line of them when she had finished. 300 bowed heads grew very still. The wind held its breath through the pines. Then, without any signal, Henry could see or hear pass between them. Every one of those 300 figures laid the open palm of their right hand flat against their own armored chest. They held it there for a long-held moment, in unison. Then they bowed once together, low and deep, in a single great breath of motion. Henry did not understand the meaning of the gesture they had given him, but it did not need any understanding for him to feel it through his old chest. He stood quite still in his doorway. He laid his own rough palm flat against his own chest, the way he had seen them do above him. He bowed his head down low. When he looked up again, the ridge above his cabin was already emptying of its 300. They were taking the sky again together, going home to wherever home was for them now. They left behind only the long, pale stone of her house, set carefully by his woodpile, and they left behind a few who would stay with him. Kor stayed in the clearing with him. 6 of the guard he had carefully chosen stayed with Kor. They built small, simple shelters at the edge of the dark tree line, well out of sight from the cabin door. They kept their long, quiet watch from there through the rest of that winter. They came to the door only when invited. He invited them often, in fact. They ate at his table on the nights he asked them to come in from the cold, which was more nights than he had ever expected to ask anyone in his life. They learned his words slowly across the long winter. He learned a few more of theirs in return, sounds his old throat could only half shape. Vale stayed too. She did not announce it to him as a decision. She simply did not leave the cabin when the others left. The steel brace came off her wing in the 4th week, when the bone beneath had finally set true under its long, careful binding. She flew once over the pass to test the mended span. She came back down to him at the door, with her cheeks bright from the cold and a small, quiet smile on her face. She told him that the wing was good now. She did not say that she was leaving him because of it. She did not leave. She came and went after that, on her own slow rhythm between the days. She would be gone for a few days at a time, sometimes a full week, on what she called the business of her people in the wider world. Then she would come back down through his pass at dusk, on a quiet evening. She would land in the small clearing in front of his cabin. She would shake the snow from her wings. He would have the iron kettle on whenever she came back. He had learned somehow to feel her coming a full half hour before she ever landed. The empty chair across his small table was no longer empty between visits. The fire in his cabin no longer burned only for one. She told him more each time about her life. She told him about the slow council she now sat on. He told him about the long, careful rebuilding her scattered people had begun in her name across many worlds. He listened to all of it without saying very much in return. He had no place in any of that wider rebuilding she described, and they both understood this without speaking it. But he had a place at his own table on the pass. She came to that table whenever she could, between her long absences. That, between them, was enough for both. Cor came and went as well, in his own quieter pattern of returns, though he came less often than Vale did. He always brought small offerings when he came. The spring came late that year, up on the pass as it usually did at his altitude. The deep drifts shrank back slowly from his woodpile through the long thaw. The long pale stone of her house emerged whole again from beneath the melt, washed clean by the running water of the spring. Crocuses came up around its base. Henry walked out one bright morning to see the crocuses around the stone. Vale walked beside him through the soft, thawing snow. Cor stood at a respectful distance by the open door of the forge, his great scaled arms folded against the cool morning air. The three of them stood together quietly. None of them said anything. The wind moved. Henry was older now. He could feel it some mornings deep in his hands at the forge, the long, slow stiffness of a man who had worked iron for 50 winters. But he had a hearth of her people now, in her old law, and he had a guest whose name he spoke as easily as his own. He had a captain who had become his friend. In the long evenings, he would sit by the fire in his cabin, with his pipe lit and drawing well. Vale would sit across from him in the chair that had once been Morris. Cor would sit on the bench by the cold forge, with his great head almost touching the low beam. The three of them would speak quietly of small things. They spoke of the weight of the year passing above the pass. They spoke of the shape the coming summer would have around them. They spoke of the small repairs Henry meant to undertake when the ground thawed fully. They spoke of the small, slow politics of her people's long rebuilding, which Vale described in plain words he could follow. They spoke of the stars above the cold pass when the night sky was clear. They spoke of the old names her people had given to those stars across the many generations of their watching. Henry would listen most of the time. He would speak when he had something quiet to say. The three voices wove softly through each evening. Sometimes, on the very clearest of those cold spring nights, Vale would take him out into the clearing in front of the cabin. She would lift him carefully in her strong, pale arms and rise slowly into the cold air on her mended wings. You would feel the long span of her wings open behind him in the air. He would feel the strength of the bone he had set with his own hands, hold them both up against the pull of the cold sky. The pass would fall slowly away beneath their feet into the dark. The bright stars would come close enough that it seemed he could reach out his old hand and touch one of them between his fingers. She never let him fall in any of those quiet flights together. She brought him back each time to his own doorway on the cabin. She set him down gently in the cool grass or the soft snow before her. They would go inside together to the warm fire to thaw. He never spoke of any of those flights to anyone. He did not speak of them even to Cor, though Cor surely knew. There was very little that passed in that small clearing that Cor did not know. But the flights between them were a quiet thing between Vale and Henry alone, and Cor respected the quietness of it. They were a small gift she gave him without saying she was giving it. He lived many more years in that small cabin above the pass after all of that. The forge stayed warm through winters. The old iron kettle kept whistling steadily on the hearth. Cor stayed his close friend through the years, and the small guard he had chosen kept their long, quiet watch from the tree line. Vale came and went between Henry and the wide, pale sky of her people. Her people now called the small cabin a hearth of their own people, named in their old law. They sent their young to it sometimes for a season at a time. They came to learn quiet things from the old human who had once mended a broken wing. The young ones would come for a season and help him with the wood in the forge. They would learn his slow, patient ways of working iron and the small, careful ways of his small mountain. Then they would go home again, changed in small ways they could not quite name. He sent each of them off with a piece of his bread. When at last his old hands grew too stiff for the hammer at the anvil, he hung it carefully on the wall above the cold anvil. He did not take it down again from the hook. He had carried that hammer since he was 14 years old. Hanging it up was harder than he had expected it to be when the day came. Vale was with him through those last quiet months. More than she was away from the cabin, Cor was with him too, more often than not. The fire in the hearth did not go out at any hour. The chair across the small table from his meals did not go empty. The past kept its long peace above the small cabin. The young of her people came in their seasons to the cabin with small gifts of food and small offerings of quiet company. He received all of it with the same simple thanks he had once given to the first cup of tea he had poured for Kor. He did not feel that he was being honored by any of it. He only felt loved. He died on a soft spring morning in the end. The door of his small cabin stood open to the warming wind off the south slope. A cup of cooling tea sat on the small table beside his narrow bed where he lay. Vale was holding his ruffled hand in both of hers. Kor was at the foot of the bed. Kor's great scarred head was bowed low. The light came through the small high window pale and slow and gentle across his face. Henry slipped out of the world the way he had lived in it, quietly and without trouble and without complaint. The cup of tea on the small table cooled untouched. Outside, a single bird called once. Vale did not move a long while after his hand had gone still in her hands. Kor did not move either. At the foot of the narrow bed, the thin smoke from the small chimney rose straight up into the soft spring sky above the cabin. The cabin held its warmth. The wind moved softly outside to the new spring grass. Her people came again to the high pass that day, not 300 this time, many more than that, many thousands of them from all the world she had touched in her long rebuilding. They stood in long, quiet lines all along the high ridge as the sun went down. They lit small lights all along the line in the dusk. The small lights stayed burning along the ridge all the way through the long night until morning. The long, pale stone of her house remained beside the woodpile in his clearing. They left it standing there for him forever. They built a small cairn of mountain stones at the foot of the pass that bore his name and his letters and hers. If you have stayed with me all the way to this last quiet morning above the pass, then thank you, truly, from an old storyteller. These slow stories live only because you sit by the fire with me and listen to them all the way through. That matters more than you know. If something in this story moved you tonight, a small tap of the like button helps the next traveler find this small hearth on a cold night somewhere far from here. If you are new here, consider subscribing to the channel and tap the small bell beside it so the next tale finds you when it is ready for telling. I tell one of these stories every week, slow and long, the way they used to be told around the real fires before all this. There's always another hearth being lit somewhere out in the world. There's always another door opening in the snow for someone. In the comments below, tell me which moment of this one stayed. Tell me which single moment of this story stayed with you the longest tonight. The first night in the drift, the setting of the broken wing, the 6 soldiers kneeling in the bright clearing, the 300 bowed along the ridge, the flight under the stars. There's no wrong answer at all here. I read them in the evenings. Next time we sit by this small fire together, the story will be a different one, in a different place, under a different sky than this one was. There will be another quiet man somewhere in a hard galaxy, and there will be someone small and broken who comes to his door in the cold. There will be kindness given without expectation. The shape of the story changes each time we sit down. The hearth itself stays warm between the tellings. So rest easy, friend, wherever you are listening from tonight. The road, the kitchen, the long drive home, the dark, warm room before sleep. The fire in this hearth is still warm for you, and the kettle is still on. Good night.